Welcome back to the Eve approach. We are on episode 6, and don't worry, we're not sending another communications probe to Eve. I think we've got enough of that. No, we're going to send a scanner. No, we're going to do some scanning stuff in this episode, but we're also going to do something else. So don't turn off if you're just not interested in scanners, because yeah, I know that they can be a bit tedious at times. We are going to do some scanning. We're going to put a scanner around Gilly. We're going to put some scanners around Eve, primarily because I like to do it. It's nice information. The other reason is that it does open potentially up some options for us. So, for example, around Gilly, it would allow us to basically mine some fuel and send that to Eve, because then we would have Eve orbital fuel, which we might need for some of our later missions if we're going to go to the surface and we want to come back from the surface and things like that. And around Eve, primarily, it's about, well, could we actually refuel on the surface of Eve? I'll talk to that in a minute, though. You'll see the craft that I'm actually building is very much a modification of our communications craft, and I've basically stuck a section on the bottom there that's very much like the sort of stage that we had on the bottom of our Gilly lander, in fact, in the previous episode. So yeah, we've got the previous episode. So yeah, so we're going to send 3 of these, primarily because if I send 2, I have to stack them on top of each other. Otherwise, when I decouple one, the whole craft becomes unbalanced, because one's got to go to Gilly and something's got to stay in Eve. So, or at least that was my thinking. In reality, I could have put them side by side. There's enough fuel on board and Delta V to not have worried about that. So in reality, didn't need to send 3, but we had the payload capacity for it, so I did. Now, these are going to go in fairings, and I would really love some feedback off people, because the fairing that I put on here is pretty much, and you're going to see I'm strutting everything up. We've got the sensors on the top there. They're folded away. The fairing goes over and covers them. Now, is there a glitch? Because I noticed this thing was really unstable. You'll notice it's wobbling. I know it was wobbling, okay? This thing was really unstable, more so than normal. And you can see that fairing, and I don't know if you can pick it out because of YouTube's sort of compression, but it felt as though it was all wobbly. And to put it this way, it felt as though the scanners were open. And I know they're not, but is there a glitch in Kerbal where it treats the scanners as open when you launch them? It just felt as though I was getting a lot of resistance at the top of the craft, more so than normal. And I know the fairing is a little chunkier, but even so, it should not have been like that. So yeah, that was weird, and I need to think about that, particularly if we're going to send fairings to Eve or anything like that, because re-entry with stuff like that, it could be problematic. We've already tried that with some of our little landers on Eve, and we had some interesting effects, so I'm not sure. So there we are. We've got our standard launch stage into orbit, and it is a case of sending this thing off. Well, we've got to get it into orbit first. That would probably be a good idea, sea monsters, wouldn't it? Yeah. One of the options that I'm considering for going to Eve is to actually land a craft with some mining equipment on and fuel itself up. But you have that issue there of, well, the mining equipment has mass. So yeah, debate. Anyway, in this episode, we're also going to be landing a space station base on Gilly. And you'll see what I actually did was I took our normal orbital station, took the top of it and put it on the bottom, and then took off the cupola and moved. I basically turned it upside down, okay, because I wanted the docking ports at the top. I had a pot, like in my mind, the option of, I wonder if I could dock something on the surface of Gilly and have a giant like tower. I had that feeling because I wondered whether I could also attach this thing to the ground using the new ground anchors, which you will see later if we get to Gilly how well they go. So yeah, we load these up with lots of lovely sciencey goodness and things like that. And you know what? I've got to say this. There has got to be a quicker way of loading these up. Like, if I make one of these and then copy paste it, if it's the symmetry version, if I, for example, have the little pods that stick on the side, it does not keep its contents. Now, I understand why they do that. I do. But I'd like to have the ability to keep contents. So yeah. So there you go. You see, we're just repositioning those tanks and engines and things like that. We're going to put 6 little tiny... Now, this is the funny bit. Because it's Gilly, we'll put tiny little landing legs on there. And we put some... I don't know why I put ladders on it. I really don't, because in Gilly I can actually jump. I think that was the concern. I didn't want to be jumping and missing the actual craft and flying off into orbit. I was concerned about that, so that's possibly a reason. Anyway, we put it onto the top of the launch stage we've used before for the Eve and Gilly orbital craft, and that goes up, and you can see this was launched before the Gilly orbital station. This was actually using the Eve one, and then I modified it and vice versa, blah, blah, blah. So it's still got that wobble because I didn't put struts on the interstage sections. So note to self, strut the interstage sections. But even so, this actually went up easier, more easily to pilot than the sensors. The sensors were like someone had put a barn door on the top of my rocket, and that's the only way I could describe it. So it would be really good to know if anybody else gets that, or whether it was just maybe a glitch with that launch for me, or whether it was just that the fairings weren't quite big enough, and so it was clipping something odd, or I don't know, it seemed very odd. Anyway, we get this thing into orbit, and you'll see the sun has come up and is big. I should say something poetic then, but I'm not going to bother. Right, so we're in orbit and we've got a crew on board, and we've got 3 crew. My realization at this point is that actually we have 3 crew on it, but I think I should have enough delta V on. And you'll see here, I can't get my antenna out, because when I repositioned them, you see there, look, I'm moving the thing, it's not working. So we send one of the crew out, and it's the engineer, and I'm like, well, what do I do? How do I do that? Is there a strut? What actually happened was, I think that when we rearranged it, there was some part clipping. We've got the solar panel further up. We've got, if you actually look at the position of things like struts, the struts were actually interacting in an odd way as well. So what actually ended up happening, there you go, I ended up detaching one of the actual dishes and then repositioning it. Then I figured out that the struts were in the wrong place, removed the struts, and then the whole thing came back, and then I had to reattach the dish back to where it came from. So there we go. Yeah, that was a little concerning, shall we say. Anyway, I'm not going to show you the transfer burn or anything like that. I will show you the capture, because you've seen enough transfer burns by now, and the only reason I kept a bit in orbit prior to our departure burn was because of the antenna situation. So yeah, that was an odd little thing. So we're going to capture with our Gilly lander, and we're going to do what we've done before. You can see we've got a few craft actually on that, and it's going to sit there. It can sit there for a while we deal with our scanners. So they're going to capture as well, and the aim for these was to also put them into an inclination similar to Gilly's. Now, I am not saying that's perfect, primarily because we're coming from interplanetary space, and yeah, you're limited in certain ways as to how you can actually incline your orbit, but we got a reasonable one. And then we're going to do a little plane change of, it's like 300 meters per second, something like that. It's not a big one, considering this stage actually has so much left in it. So there we go, we've got past Eve, and then we're going to do our little burn, wham bam, fire up those engines. They're very efficient. We've got signal, of course, because we've got signal from everything right now. We've got so many transmitters around. If I actually left these upper stages, I was thinking about this, if we'd have left these upper stages there with relay dishes on, we probably wouldn't have needed a communication system, let me put it that way. So anyway, this is going to go to Gilly first. We've got all 3 of these probes. They're going to head to Gilly, but they're not all going to stay at Gilly. So when we get into Gilly's sphere of influence, we decouple our Gilly probe, turn everything on. Now this is interesting, because of our Gilly lander situation, or the Gilly communications probe situation, I only unfurl 1 solar panel. I've learned at this point that, you know, if I unfurl 2 and then decouple things, it could go horribly wrong. So this probe will capture, and you'll actually see in the background, its parent ship is actually going to continue straight on out of the sphere of influence of Gilly, and it can actually then go off and do stuff. You'll notice that our transmitter is clipping through our fuel tank. I had not calculated that. And there we go. So we decouple that. We've now got a little bit, and this one I've learned to actually go, you know what, we'll use the fuel on board. We'll use that little tiny tank on board. So that's what we do. We use that little tiny tank that we've got on board, and this thing is going to put itself into a polar orbit. Now, little interesting bit of information. The scanner has optimal minimum and maximum ranges and things like that. Gilly, because of its size, does not abide by those. So what you basically want to do is just put it into a sensibly high orbit of Gilly, and the scanner will work, okay? Because its lower limit is stupidly high. And there we go, we've got the scanner working. Wham bam, beautiful, wonderful. There we go. Now we need the scanner because I want to be able to see ore and so forth on the surface for our other mission, which is going to land at Gilly, because of course, yeah, Gilly is potentially going to be a refueling base. So here we are, back on our Gilly lander, and it is also, of course, in that highly, well, semi-inclined orbit around Eve. We need to we need to rename it, obviously, because it's got an incorrect name. I'm not entirely sure why I renamed it. And so we're going to do what we've done before. We're going to basically change our inclination to match Gilly's, and then it's very much like as if you were docking. It's a Hoffman transfer, it's a docking. I would treat the interaction with Gilly like you're trying to dock with something almost, because it is very much similar, at least to the fact that, you know, the sphere influence of Gilly is so small that it is very much like you're trying to dock. It takes a bit of an effort. So you're trying to get your burn in the right place and things like that. And there you go. You can see I'm just playing around a lot with this because I really wanted to do just a single burn capture sort of situation where, you know, I would do this, and it would just one burn. It would take me close enough and then I'd capture. It was challenging, shall we say, just because our inclination was slightly off still. And because of the size of Gilly's sphere of influence, if your inclination is off by like a degree or so, you can actually miss the sphere of influence. So yeah, inclination is king for Gilly. So there we go. Get ourselves en route, and then it's just a case of, well, what can I do? I do a bit of manual playing around with it at this point to see what we can do. And there you go. Second burn is going to take me nicely to there. So we did a little bit of random burning, and then there we go. We're going to come around and then do this burn here. And this one, again, not a big burn. We actually don't need all the fuel on this system right now. We could have used the smaller upper stage, but we didn't. Primarily because I need the width for the actual fairing when we're launching, so we might as well have this tank diameter, and then if I put a smaller tank on it, a shorter tank, it looks a bit silly. So we can launch this, we might as well, is the mindset. You can do these missions cheaper though. So here we go, we're gonna basically pause there for some reason. We're going to basically capture around Gilly as best we can, and yeah, it's the biggest burn is actually probably the capture burn of Gilly. The landing burn is not really a problem. Now what you could do, and I'd be tempted to, if you've already got science on the surface, is actually just keep burning until you've got an impact point, then decouple, and then use your engines to basically pull yourself out of impact, because then you get rid of this little first stage that you've got. Or you can basically put yourself, as we're going to do here, we want to land equatorially because, well, I'm putting everything equatorially just because of ease of use. Also, make sure that you don't go retrograde in your equatorial. That's an important thing to remember. So always be checking that inclination. It might look as though it's equatorial, but if you're going the other direction, 180 degrees difference is a problem. I almost did that with this one. There we go. So we're now after that tiny little burn on an equatorial plane-ish. It's close enough. Gilly is not a big issue for that. We just check with our scanner. There we go. Turn that on. You got to remember to turn your scanning on because you want to have a good look. And then we're going to have a look and see where, is there anything interesting? And Gilly's weird because it's so lumpy. A lot of the scanning areas don't match up with characteristics that you'd think. So I'm looking here and going, right, there's a bump that sticks out there. I quite like the look of it. Let's have a look at that, is pretty much it. I'm aware of the fact that I could actually just land at any moment in reality. So we're going to just pull this down and we're going to land there. We're actually, there we go. I've actually gone now and burned the other way because we've got so much fuel. I actually burned this until it was going retrograde, so it was going to go back to where we want. Now, the other thing about Gilly is it does rotate at a reasonable speed. And because its gravity is so low, it's a bit like Minmus. Sometimes you can line up a landing in Minmus, and yeah, you don't land where you think you're going to land because the planet or the moon has rotated underneath you quicker than you've actually fallen. The other thing is to remember that when you're coming down at the surface of Gilly, your actual sort of lateral velocity in relative to the surface can actually be quite significant. So yeah, something to particularly with this craft, which is quite tall, I was aware of that because I was concerned it would topple. However, we have a reaction wheel on board which should be able to counter pretty much anything that the Gilly can throw at it. So there we go, we've got rid of our tank. That's going to fall down. Again, missed a trick because we don't have any deployable science to measure, impacts or anything like that on the surface. Pity about that. And you can see the boulder fields, and we're actually, for a craft this size, we're coming down at, a reasonably good pace. We do have, you can see the fuel reserves on this tank, on this craft, are actually quite high. We don't use much at all, even though it's sort of like, I think it's about 10 tons, this, possibly more actually, someone could tell me. And you can see on the horizon there, the overlay for the scanner that comes up, which I think is quite interesting that you can see it sometimes at certain angles. I think it's quite amusing. So there we go, we're going to come down onto a little surface, boom, and at that point that should be the end of the episode, correct? Yeah, the episode should end right now, but I want to get out and do something, because in my head this was designed so I could dock to the top of it, but there's no point docking to the top of it if it's just going to fall over. So I think to myself, right, we'll get our engineer out, and what I really want to do is I want to put a ground anchor down. Now, I've not really played with ground anchors. I think I did a bit with one, and this is really annoying, having to put one into your pack before you can do things with them. And there we go, put the ground anchor down there, and then is it fixed? Is it actually working? And at this point, the ground anchor was a bit weird because, yeah, I ended up taking parachutes off one person and moving some there, and then I think it was just a nightmare. So there we go, we put the ground anchor down and it just sits there. We put two of them down. Can I get them to do anything? You've got to do that, you've got to carry it just like a thing, and then it goes down. Right, there we go. So we've now got extra ground anchors. I think I may have duplicated one somehow, I'm not entirely sure what happened. So at this point I thought I want to attach my craft. You can't. So what did I learn? I learned if you're going to put a ground anchor on a ground and you want to attach a craft to it, put a docking port on it. Put a docking port on it, have the two dock to each other. Now, stupid me did not think about the fact this craft has multiple docking ports on the top. I should have just gone and picked one up. No, didn't think about that. Should have. So, we may go back in the future and do that, but I don't know. It just seems a bit of effort. So anyway, once you've done that, we're going to put out our science equipment anyway, because we can get some science from the surface at least. And this is that usual sort of messing around, putting your solar panels down. And I do like the fact you can put deployable science down. I do. And this is not a negative there we go. Thank you. It's not a negative comment for Kerbal. It's just, it's a bit faffy at times, isn't it? Particularly on Gilly, where if you take a big step, and you watch this, there we go. I'm not using a jetpack. That's just a big stride. Instead of taking the tiny steps, you notice how I'm moving sideways really, really slow, like tiny steps. If you take a normal step on Gilly, you start flying. And that's a problem. Well, there we go. We've got some science going on. So you've got to be very careful. You've got to be very careful about every single step you take. Oh, and then if you hit something, there we go. Whoopsie-doos. We'll carry it back, and then we'll just hit the craft and land on the floor. Yeah. Oh, and then we bounced off the craft, and now, yeah. So this was it was a challenge. I've actually cut a big section out of this because it was backwards and forwards challenge. And then we get back into the craft, put our solar panels out, all that wonderful stuff. We get a bit of science going on because we want to get some science going on. Isn't that good? There we go, get the science going on. Of course, we're going to need electricity because we're going to run out of electricity. Make sure our dishes are set to partial transmit, and we're ready. We're sorted. It's all done, isn't it? Everything's sorted. Everything, no problems whatsoever. Not a problem. You know what? We'll move the whole base. Yeah, I decided just to launch the craft. I actually hit the thrust key by accident. I was tempted to just let it come straight back down, but I thought no, we better use the engines just to slow it down a bit. So there we go. We're gonna pop that down and sit it there. So it's now not even near the science anyway. So there we go. We'll get out. We'll put the ladder down, and we're done. So from me, until next time, have a great one.